Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you joining us today, we welcome you in. Logistics has always fascinated me, having been involved in the industry for a couple of decades anyway. I always like to look at the numbers, and the numbers are fascinating. We always associate China with our electronics. Oh, that iPhone is made in China. Oh, that computer's made in China. Blah, 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 so on and so forth. And while it might be true that it's manufactured in China, what I found out is China actually doesn't manufacture the integrated circuitry that it uses. Or at least not the majority of it. See, China is a net importer of integrated circuits. It may be an exporter of office equipment, it may be an exporter of a lot of things, but it imports $123 billion worth of integrated circuits every year, and it only exports $109 billion. So basically $10 billion difference, which $10 billion in integrated circuits is a heck of a lot. It means the Chinese are pretty much using a third-party manufacturing system. They've outsourced their integrated circuits to another country because Chinese workers don't want to do it. But in return, they still get to put the Made in China stamp on whatever it is that they're exporting because it's assembled there. And see, that's the real trick. The made in versus assembled in. Over here in the Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries, we're a little more sensitive to such things. For it to be made in America, it just has to be 60% assembled in the United States. Not 100%. So you can have the ashtray, the tires, and drivetrain all manufactured in another country, but it's still a made in America product because the body of the shell, 60% of it, are made in America. China, because of its unique status, which is partly isolationist, partly open. Remember, China has almost a two-state system. China does have an open, industrialized base that it encourages the West to invest in and develop, but also has a very controlled sector of the country. The reason why people go to factories and work there is because they're trying to get them off the farms, to modernize them. And that took place way back in the 60s and 70s with the Glorious Revolution, as it was so called, also known as the wholesale starving and slaughter of farmers. But China also imports a heck of a lot of oil. They import wood, timber, etc. And a lot of it comes from Australia, Japan, and South Korea. Oh yeah, those countries that they allow to be threatened by their little buddy, North Korea. They can't do it officially, but they can make it non-official by just encouraging Kim Il-sung, Kim Il-jong, Kim, whatever Kim is in power at the time you're listening to this broadcast. Because honestly, it doesn't matter which Kim is in power, they're still in Beijing's back pocket. Russia is an also major net importer of oil, despite the fact that Russia has huge resources of petroleum. And the reason why that is for Russia is Russia's infrastructure is very old. Their refineries were built between the 20s and the 40s, the 1920s to the 1940s, depending on when you're listening to this broadcast. Now, we all know with the trade sanctions against Russia, they are not doing such a good job at exporting. But despite that, despite the fact that supposedly there's trade sanctions against Russia, 43% of their exports go to the European Union. And what makes that interesting is that there's no restrictions on the United States buying things from Europe. So while we're imposing these tariffs and restrictions and cutting people off, they leave the back door open, so there's always a way for a country to export things and make money. Because the World Economic Council still needs to see money flowing. As much as North Korea tries to be isolationist and tries to be on its own, they still need to make money. There's actually a North Korean chain of restaurants around the world where they send their citizens forth to give a, quote, authentic, end quote, Northern European experience. I've never had the luxury of eating at one of them, but at the same token, nobody else does this. The Chinese don't send out restaurants so that we can eat authentic Chinese food. There's enough immigrants with an E, not with an I, to other countries that you can go to pretty much any country and find almost any style of Chinese food. It's like the United States. The United States doesn't need to set up burger joints because there's a burger joint pretty much anywhere in the world that you can imagine. I wouldn't be surprised there's one at the South Pole. All that being said, it's interesting how China, which manufactures so many phones and computers and devices, still winds up importing the integrated circuits. Because Russia, they pretend to be China's friend, but there's still a significant amount of tension between them. Because manufacturing a jet engine, for example, is very hard. China is able to manufacture a jet engine. Most countries are. But they're not able to manufacture a modern, high bypass flow, stealth, three-dimensional vectored engine like Russia and the United States are. And that's why China is always trying to get a hold of these technologies. And they're doing a good job of it. They just simply buy what they need, because Russia has weapons to spare. They have so much manufacturing capacity, but people will buy American first because it's perceived that American is better. This is partially true. United States equipment is generally better. Better than Chinese, better than Russian, but at the same token, you always pay a price for performance. You wouldn't use a Lamborghini as your daily driver unless you were obscenely wealthy. You wouldn't, use a multi-million-dollar fighter jet if you just want to drop some bombs on some insurgents. No. The Americans are the luxury option. The Russians are the second best, and the Chinese are trying to work their way into third place. In Africa right now, there's a pretty major arms sales bonanza that is going on. And China's in there trying to show people, hey, look, our stuff is just as good as the Russian and the United States. Russians are in there saying, hey, you know us. We've been selling you MiGs since the 50s, if not earlier in some cases. And the United States is wandering around there with their F-16s and F-35s and saying, hey, you buy this stuff, it's the best on the market. So arms sales are going to be a very interesting predictor of the future. But China importing so many raw goods doesn't bode well for them. It means ultimately they're going to have to overtake the United States dollar, the petrodollar, if they're going to have any control over their future. Because ultimately, the United States dollar is in demand because most quantities are traded in relation to United States dollars. Whether you're dealing in euros, whether you're dealing in British pounds, whether you're dealing in Russian rubles, Chinese yuan, when it goes international, they will always come back, and I have personal experience with this, it always comes back to, okay, what does that work out to in American? I always have the exchange rate on my computer when it comes to calculating rates, because that's what people want to know. If it's going in between your own country, yes, you convert back to Canadian, to yuan, to, the drachma, whatever your local currency is. But the United States still has a hammerlock on international trade. You need US dollars to trade internationally, because that's what everybody wants payment in. The only currency maybe that people will trust a little more than the dollar would be the British pound. And that is only because of its long standing. But most people are going to trade in the United States dollars. Unless China can somehow manipulate the market so that people trust the yuan, they're never going to be the first power. As I covered a couple of months back, China has kind of gotten their feet wet by promising this as a cryptocurrency, the yuan becoming a secured means of transaction online. China is getting there first. The US is in the process of developing it, but China is a bit further ahead. I still think cryptocurrency is still a little much in its infancy to see major play for another 10, 15 years. None of the people I have ever talked to, and believe me, I've talked to a lot of industries, and none of them has ever said, oh, what's your policy on cryptocurrency? No, they just say, okay, you're charging American, Canadian, Mexican pesos, Filipino pesos. That's what they want to know. How are you paying? In United States dollars or something else? From there, the negotiations go pretty simple. They never bring up Bitcoin, Dogecoin, whatever coin is popular today. So going towards a cryptocurrency, I do see a long-term future in. But I think the United States has a hammerlock for a good 50 years on still being the currency of choice for the masses. Now, China cannot afford to cut off its trade with the United States, and the United States cannot afford to cut off its trade with China. Yes, both of them could easily replace it given time. If they both decided now they were not going to be dependent on each other, that would be interesting because it would develop industries in a lot of places where they chose to have it in their own backyard, which would be wise for both China and the United States, because the United States has a fantastic storehouse of natural resources in Canada and Mexico, and China has all of Asia and Russia to draw from, and Russia has timber, oil, all sorts of things China wants. So it would be possible, and this cross-Pacific trade would no longer be a thing, and then they could threaten each other as much as they want. Until then, neither country is going to take much of a risk of running into conflict with each other. Yes, the United States might try to take Taiwan. Yes, there might be a little bit of a conflict over there involving American forces, but ultimately, China wants to make sure their dollar is secure and in the lead before they do that. That being said, like I said a few weeks ago, there's a military buildup coming. Remember, naval strategy is built strategy, and they're building for a future. Remember owning the weather in 2025? Well, all of a sudden they're building ships for 2040. So somewhere in that time frame, someone has the idea that they're going to be kicking off a really big game. World War III? Not sure, because nations don't really declare any war anymore, and I just cannot see either nation firing a nuke at each other. But I can see a couple skirmishes. Russia and the United States wouldn't start a skirmish because the threat of nuclear war was there. But now with nuclear missile shielding and interceptors being much better than ever before, yeah, it's possible that people would wage a conventional war with some sort of agreement that they wouldn't go nuclear. Israel has managed to wage a whole bunch of wars without going nuclear. South Africa waged a whole bunch of wars and never went nuclear. And Germany has had nuclear bombs under the table for decades now and has never used them, despite the fact they've gone through some turbulent times. Russia's had several wars. Against the Ukraine, they didn't need to use a nuke there. They just marched in and took it. Against Georgia, they didn't need to use a nuke. They just went in and took it. So it's very possible to wage a war and not even bring a nuclear bomb to the table. Russia, China, and the United States all know this. You know what? In this world, we need Russia, France, and the United Kingdom to start stepping up again. They have the economy, they have the standing to be able to counterweight China and the United States. But they need to start planning now. And they have time, like I said, 2025 to 2040. That's enough time to start developing your infrastructure. But waiting any longer is not going to help. Now that we're supposedly in the recovery phase of this pandemic, it's time to start looking 10, 20, 30 years in the future and saying, what resources are we going to be playing with? What are the people of 2040 going to be doing with their lives? Because it certainly isn't going to be manufacturing computers and shipping them all over the place. No. There's something big coming, and I don't quite know what. But it's written everywhere. The plans are there. It just needs the right spark. And there's tinderboxes all over the place, from the Middle East to Taiwan to the South China Sea, North Korea. Everywhere there's conflict. There's wars and rumors of wars, just as the biblical prophecy said. Again, I'm not seeing World War III, I'm not seeing Armageddon, but I can see a pretty tense standoff in the near future. One that might have severe economic repercussions because of China's relationship with itself, with its partners, and with the United States. Remember, it's all about the logistics. And if you're manufacturing electronics and getting your integrated circuits from elsewhere, you're basically manufacturing cases. You need those electronics because somebody's doing it better and cheaper than you possibly can. Just like the reason they need Russian engines for their aircraft. Yes, they can build them, just not as high performance. But anyways, we wish to thank you for joining us on the Silverlight Show. Please like, share, and subscribe. And to everyone, I hope you have a fantastic day.